it's not just the animals that makes the Himalayas so extraordinary, it's also the plants. In fact, the floral wealth of this region has had an enormous impact on the lives of all of us. It all began in the early 19th century, when a new wave of adventurers risked their lives to collect exotic plants from across the world. The Himalayas was one of the most promising and tempting regions of all. This rugged land was still largely unknown to the outside world. Here, surely, there were new plant species to be found. That quest led to a special connection with the Royal Botanic Gardens at Kew.
Well, in the 19th century in particular, there was a lot of collecting of plants throughout the world. Particularly well-to-do people like to build up collections of specimens, just as they like to collect stuffed animals and this type of thing.
Joseph Dalton Hooker was one such well-to-do explorer, and, lucky for him, his father was director of Kew. As Western high society became gripped by a gardening craze, William Hooker sent his son in search of new plants. In 1847, Joseph set off on a 3-year expedition into the Himalayas. Single-minded and determined, he endured great hardships. He suffered with altitude sickness, his journey was sabotaged by local people, he was even imprisoned. Nevertheless, he walked for 8 hours a day, collecting plants and documenting every detail of his travels. He was the first European to collect in the region, and his discoveries made him one of the greatest botanists of the 19th century, a key scientist of his age. He returned from the Himalayas with a wealth of new flowers, including 28 new species of rhododendron.
We've got some examples here of specimens that were collected by Hooker. One example here is Rhododendron arboreum, which in fact is the national flower of Nepal, but a large number of specimens collected by Hooker of this species from Nepal. And we do have specimens that have got Hooker's name on them. So here we got a specimen that's collected in 1848. Simply by bringing these new species back, then it would have had a great impact, because lots of these things would not have been seen before, so lots of new things introduced into cultivation, so these plants would have the real sort of wow factor for gardeners at the time.
Gardeners across the nation competed for the boldest and brightest specimens, bringing a little bit of the Himalayas into everyone's garden. In fact, a quarter of the plants in our gardens today came originally from the Himalayas, from azaleas to euphorbias, gentians to irises, and peonies to primulas. But Joseph Hooker also recognized the value of plants to science and medicine. Today, the herbarium makes Kew one of the most important botanical institutions in the world. It's a vast database housing over 7 million specimens and representing 98% of the world's plant species. Succeeding his father as director, Joseph also opened the Jodrell Laboratory and firmly established Kew as a scientific institution.
This laboratory does a lot of work on the biological activity of plants. We have an emphasis on looking for medicinal uses of plants, and that could be what we term over-the-counter medicines, things like cough and colds, but also looking for drugs that could be used to treat things like Alzheimer's, TB and cancer. The Himalayan region is estimated to have about between 18 and maybe 21,000 different species of plants. And of those, there's documented evidence on uses of about 2,000 of those for medicinal uses. So one of the things that we're doing at Kew is partly capturing the traditional uses, but also looking at the traits that plants have in different areas that they have evolved to protect themselves, that can help us design drugs for the future.
People living in the remote valleys of the Himalayas have always relied on plants for their medical remedies, but so do we. Around a quarter of all our pharmaceuticals contain substances derived from plants. Plants that we may take for granted in our gardens could be miniature medicine chests.
Some of the plants that we've been working on, some of them are quite famous to the areas because they're not only medicinal plants, but they're in the culture of the people, and that would be rhododendrons. Every bit of the rhododendron plant has a traditional use, from the flowers to the leaves to the bark to the roots is used. Now the other plant is peony. Now we know it for its beautiful flowers, but within the Himalayas it's often the root bark that is used as a medicine. And I've had quite a few trips actually looking for samples of this because it is a plant that has been overexploited. But in Himalayas there is a real issue with the continuing growth and overexploitation by man. And therefore we could be losing things that we haven't yet studied.
At the start of the 19th century, almost nothing was known about Himalayan plants. Now we are methodically examining them all to see how they might be of use to us. As so few people live up here, it was once thought that the high-altitude plants were safe from exploitation. But today there is a much greater threat. As the climate warms, glaciers are receding, and the land no longer suits the plants that evolved here. But there's nowhere else for them to grow. With climatic changes threatening thousands of plant species worldwide, Kew has embarked on the most ambitious of all plant conservation projects. The Millennium Seed Bank at Wakehurst Place, Kew's base in West Sussex, holds more than 1 million seeds.
We know as seed bank people that you don't have to lose plants, you don't have to lose them. We can use seed banks to actually make sure that these plants don't go extinct.
Here, seeds arrive from plant hunters working all around the world to be catalogued and barcoded. Each batch is carefully sifted and cleaned. Then they are X-rayed to ensure that there's no contamination by insects that might harm them. Only after everything has been checked are they banked for the future. In an underground vault, they're kept dormant at -20 degrees.
Essentially what seeds are their little time capsule. Plants can survive for centuries using their seed. And what we do is we accentuate that ability. And we've learned a lot about seeds such that we can actually spin that process out. We know that we can keep seeds alive for 1,000 years.
The Millennium Seed Bank has already ensured that 54,000 species of plants are safe from extinction.
The seed bank is just the first step, really, because after that we have to make sure that we can turn them back into plants. There's no good having a 1.6 billion seeds sitting in a fridge downstairs, but it's our first stepping stone to then turning those species back into real plants.
Each seed is valuable. As plants continue to provide food, fresh air, habitat stability, even medicines, we know we need them for our future. Their time capsules may even hold the key to problems that we have yet to face.